about research and innovation. GDP is important, right? The budget that you put into it. But how many countries actually put patent rates? You have Nobel Prizes, you have big doctors coming out of there. Where are they working? Not outside. And when they're inventing something, where are they patenting it? Outside. So, just maybe close this parenthesis here. And maybe, Shirley, maybe I'll give you a word before we wrap up. We have 15 minutes, so if you want to contribute to that conversation.
No, I think it's absolutely valid. I think we can't, our universities are good universities. And as soon as you have your doctorate or your MBA or whatever, you literally leave the country. And there's many students leaving because they can't find the necessary job opportunities here as well. So they do go and find it somewhere else. Again, beneficiation is important because, I think our miners have done it well in South Africa, and especially the tier 1 miners. There's tier 2 miners where there's the green and minerals and metals happening as well. And I'm not talking about gold, platinum, and copper, but the others, where it's maybe a smaller ore body, that needs more capital to be invested. Where's the strategic partner that comes in there? And again, I think the mining is one part. We don't have to beneficiate from 0 to 100. Even if we do the first 2 steps to get to a final using, say, example, the solar panel, use some of those steps, get to a point, instead of sending everything that we do that comes into the solar panel and then have to import it back, for our renewables. I think there's some programs that's done extremely well. Gardens, etc. Maybe that, gardens, etc. Maybe that, academics itself in today's world, with AI doing a lot of it, that definitely needs to change. It's changing, as I've mentioned, traditional finance will always be there, but it's changing. So for us, looking at skills differently, it's one thing. And sorry, Dr. Mark, I'm remaining with capital, follow sustainability, because sustainability is a big word. We look at ESG, we look at skills, we look at communities, we look at everything when we consider any financing.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Adnan, for bringing this question, because indeed, when we think of it, the agreements and make sure that those agreements are thoroughly reviewed by people with expertise. I know that the African Bank has a department dedicated to that offers the governments that are in the process of reviewing their agreements with other governments, with other companies, making sure that the interests of the country and the continent at large are embedded for the long-term benefits. Thank you very much. So making sure that when we talk about critical minerals, it really reflects what the continent and countries want, both from the national and the continental perspective. Yeah. And I was talking today just to close with someone about, for example, there's no opportunity in those agreements to have skills transfer with countries you are signing agreement with. And I think recently a report came up on how certain countries have recycling facilities that are greener, for example, than other countries. Like this kind of transfer as well. Can there be a learning from peers in the continent or from other countries on how to run a recycling facility or a processing facility in a clean way, making sure it doesn't create further problems with residents. But there are learnings that span across the whole ESG spectrum and not only the technological aspects that we should be embedding in agreements. Thank you. Isaac.
Yeah, so for me, it's now or never for Africa. I think we are closer than we think. For instance, a 1 ton of bauxite is about $100, and a 1 ton of aluminum is $2,700. Just putting that rate in there just skyrockets your beneficiation. So for me, it's now or never. This is the time for us to break the gap and define critical minerals in our own terms and make sure it's benefiting our people.
Thank you, very clear. So next year when you come here, you will tell us we have the sniper running and you're getting your 27,000, right? Thank you, Marriage.
So for me, I mean, we do have the strategies. We do have the Africa Green Mineral Strategy. If you look at it, it's a very comprehensive. And now we are seeing countries having their own strategies, right? Ghana has, Zambia has one. Of they call them critical mineral strategy. Sierra Leone is on the way. They told me and the speaking to the ministers. What I urge now is, first of all, let's get it right on the strategy side, even at the local, at the national levels. But then again, that's a difficult one because accountability is not within us. Is to make sure that you follow it when you have bilaterals or what cooperation with others, because that's where the problem is. Let's put it out there because I think framework and strategies we have them. Is at the end of the day, what do you negotiate? There is the Africa Legal Support Facility that you mentioned with the Africa Legal, but do countries really go and ask them when they negotiate? They do sometimes, but not systematically. And this is where the problem for me is. I don't want to sound too controversial, but we do have the frameworks, but then we see those contracts signed that are not commensurate to the strategies that we are signed for. So you can't come and ask me next year, so what up, because it's really not within my hands. But this is what I would like to see, really, to make sure that we follow what we aspire when it comes to actual negotiations, cooperation frameworks, that we do what we were meant to do. And we have to discuss with all the stakeholders, private sector, communities, etc. But then at the end of the day, when we sign the deals, make sure that these are commensurate to what was discussed, because we discussed with these countries. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, thanks, Marit. You're bringing something that I was, thinking we could bring in the discussion earlier, but I didn't want to break the momentum for the second round. But the question of partnerships is actually really important because you are doing all the efforts to bring the continent together. The last thing you want is that there's a divide and rule behind, you know, just so that whatever has been agreed and then at the bilateral level things prevent you from doing what you have to do.
Can I just add that because these frameworks are not mandatory, they are voluntary. You cannot, like, even if it's this decision, the African Green Mineral Strategy was adopted at the African Union level, decision level, but it's not mandatory. You don't have a parliament to say you have to do this. So it's kind of maybe that's where the issue is. I'm not too sure, but it's a voluntary still.
So can I just ask, sorry, it's turning into a debate and not a conclusion, but just one question here, because you've done it for the African Mining Vision where the AMV was domesticated. Is there a plan for or is there a call for governments to actually domesticate the green mineral strategy like it was done for the African Mining Vision?
Yes.
Because then it becomes
There is an action plan, there is, but like I said, it's not mandatory. It's at the discretion of, and that we're not going to open the discussion, but this is where I think the problem is as well. It's more of like, even if it's a declaration, if it's at the African Union level, if there's no mandatory that mandates you to actually follow the African Mining Vision or the African Green Strategy. It's at the discretion of each country.
okay, thank you. I will say those who have ears listen. Over to you, Martin.
So, I guess from my perspective is how to make sure we don't kill the food sector involved in the process of making too many demands. I think Dr. Malezi's point around actually being able to absorb the skills that we want here. We demand beneficiation. We need to be able to actually take it and run with it. And so let's be cautious not to get a situation where we're not building mines because our demands are just too much. That being said, this point around partnerships and collaborations is key. In our space in Platinum Group Metals, collaborating and creating demand is something we do, not just by ourselves, as an industry, with partners. So looking at ways to find new demand segments is what we do, right? And not only do we do it in meetings that will look like it's the global north, we look to take what we learn there and bring that back to South Africa and to further its beneficiation in our country. So for me, really perhaps let's try and learn from certain parts of mining that has actually gone beyond where some other commodities are still at the cusp of thinking around beneficiation. Let's see what worked and try and accelerate what we can.
Thank you. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Thank you, Dr. Maleki.
I will say invest in regional resource-based infrastructure. It's very key, non-negotiable. Integrated energy. Value addition, beneficiation, smelting, refining requires reliable and quite often cheap electricity. Okay? Logistics networks that support local beneficiation. Efficient transportation. Shared use processing infrastructure. And I take your point, Dr. Kito. Easily said than done. Cross-border infrastructure. Not an easy thing, but it's necessary for us to have those conversations. Invest in cross-border infrastructure. That is key. The bottom line is infrastructure is the foundation of industrialization.
Thank you very much. This is very clear. We have a good. I'm going to take this back to the organizers and next year call you to ask you where we are. We have. You have the perfect 1 minute 30 to wrap up.
Thank you. I think we'll continue to finance responsible mining, processing, upstream, midstream. But I would like to see more of is downstream activity in our African countries, where there's actually going to be economic growth being developed for the people as well. I think the responsible part of mining is the following. We are here now, but we've got children and children's children that's going to be here. Responsible mining is important, and things like recycling is actually very important as well for the future as well. And we've got a responsibility to look after Africa, and that's what we all should be doing as partners and stakeholders in this.
Thank you. It's very good to end on the note on what the financiers are speaking, because at the end of the day, I think everything depends on capital and access to capital, and it's really good to see. At least I'm not generalizing, but from your perspective, you're looking at it with the lens of we will be accompanying the continent on the pathway to industrialization and development. So, 17 seconds. We're doing very good on time. Let me thank you all. That was very exciting. I don't know about you, but I had fun. So it was a really good conversation. Thank you. And join me to thank the panelists with a round of applause. I'm not going to summarize.
Alright, thank you so much everyone. If we can just take our seats and get ready for the next conversation. I think that definitely kick-started our morning very nicely, and I think I agree with Isabel that I think Dr. Maleka definitely needs to come back to give us a summary next year. Clearly this was the panel of the morning. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can please take your seats and afford our next panelists the respect that they also require, please. Okay, so we started a conversation, and I think Isabel touched on it from a cold perspective. Guys, I feel like I'm going to be a school teacher at school too. Can we please take our seats and allow the respect to our next panelists? Alright, so we continue our conversation this morning around why is coal not considered a critical mineral. And I think that the previous panel touched on it, and it is truly an important conversation. And sorry, guys, please. I'm sorry. All right, so can you please join me in welcoming our moderator, Shamini Harrington, and her panelists as we continue a very important conversation on why is coal not considered a critical mineral, and what does it actually mean in the context of Africa and South Africa as well. As we all know, coal is not a simple discussion point, so please, can I hand over to Shamini and her panel. Please, can you take your seats? All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think let's settle down. Are we good to go? All right. Okay. So, good morning and welcome to our panel session. Why is coal not considered a critical mineral? My name is Shamini Harrington. I am the Senior Executive of the Minerals Council and also your moderator for this session. So when I got this question, I was like, but South Africa has coal as critical minerals. So why are we asking this question? And then it dawned on me, actually, is this South Africa leading the charge? Should we be looking at this as a universal way of defining critical minerals? And then I thought, this panel is going to be interesting. Let's ask some difficult questions. So some may argue that coal by definition and characterization is not a mineral but a sedimentary rock. That said, it is critical to many countries globally for energy security. As such, this is a timely conversation that cuts across energy security, geopolitics, and various other issues like mineral policy and the realities of a just transition, not only for South Africa, but for economies across the world. Here at home, coal still provides 82% of South Africa's electricity and continues to stabilize the grid facing structural constraints. Improvements in the coal fleet in recent years has reduced load shedding. We've heard a lot about our energy security issues and the fact that it is stabilizing. And although this has sparked debate about the role of coal in a transitioning energy landscape, the reality is more nuanced. Simultaneously, the global scramble for critical minerals from lithium to cobalt to rare earth elements has intensified as countries race to secure the inputs needed for batteries, renewables, electric mobility, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, and the list goes on. South Africa's nascent critical minerals and metals strategy attempts to position the country within this evolving value chain, with coal on the official list here at home, but absent from critical mineral classifications elsewhere. So someone might ask, why exactly is this the case? Well, in the global north, critical minerals are defined as those needed for military defense applications and the green transition. This includes copper, lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and similar minerals. Their view is shaped by the fact that they are not naturally endowed with this. We've heard a lot about raw materials leaving the country and going to the global north to be processed. In the global south, the perspective is quite different. We are well endowed with these minerals, but we don't use it much for defense, nor do we use it for the green transition. We don't have the battery manufacturing value chains and all of the low carbon value chains that are needed. As a result, we export most of these minerals in raw form. So our definition of what is critical therefore centers on minerals that support local industries like Sasol and Eskom, that sustain jobs, generate export revenue, and meets domestic economic priorities. Coal, for example, features prominently on our list for exactly those reasons. These two perspectives are often in tension, but we need to understand the distinction. This is important, and we'll hear more from our panel on these issues. Also important to recognize that in Europe, Poland, Germany, all of them move towards coal as the preferred baseload power during times of geopolitical shocks. It really does then beg the question, how should we define coal as part of the critical minerals list? Maybe not, maybe it should be. Perhaps, again, I will raise this. Maybe South Africa's groundbreaking here, and we actually led the way, and we're paving the path very different than others can emulate. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now welcome my esteemed panelists, an exceptional group of CEOs and experts whose perspectives span policy, markets, mining, climate strategy, and community impact. Their insights will help us challenge assumptions, explore alternatives, and examine coal's place in a just, secure, and credible energy future. We have Mike Tekit, CEO of Sariti, Paul Baruya, Director Strategy and Sustainability Future Coal, Siphelele Buthelezi, Executive Manager, Council for Geosciences, Averengwe Nengwehela, CEO, Coal Tech. Good to have you all here, and thank you for playing the critical roles you play in this economy and for pushing the agenda forward. Mike, I would like to kick off with you. Could you share very briefly your perspective on why we should be concerned whether coal is considered a critical mineral or not?
I don't know. One, when you looked at the Russian-Ukraine war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw what happened to the gold prices, and we saw what happened with the panic in Europe, specifically when they started looking for coal. And some of us in South Africa were the first ones to be contacted by Europe looking for our coal, when they coal-fired power stations. Now, coal is critical for us as a country. Why? Because we have developed our infrastructure around energy, around coal. If you go to Mpumalanga, most of the power stations, this country has got about 16 coal-fired power stations, and most of those are in Mpumalanga simply because they follow the fuel, which is coal. Number two, coal is important for economic development, for socio-economic development, and for humanity to advance. What is very important for us as a country is to recognize that coal will still be here with us for coming 3 to 4 decades. And I believe that it's indispensable to economic growth, it's indispensable as part of the transition. For us to transition to renewables, we will need coal, because coal is going to have you as a baseload. You're building, last week I touched on the issue of building data centers. We're going to see a lot of EVs running on our roads, and those too will need electricity. And it's not going to be delivered by solar, wind, and other renewables. I'm an investor in renewables. Why? Because I believe in renewables, but to transition to renewables, you need baseload. And our baseload in South Africa and other countries, if you have it in abundance as coal, it's critical to your economy, it's critical to your country.
Thank you for that, Mike. Excellent points. I think, I was reading recently an article around how coal is now being utilized to augment with renewables. And it actually makes sense because you get that balancing of the grid with the base load power. So really excellent. It does beg the question, how do we think about critical minerals?
With that, Paul, I'd like to hand to you and bring you into the conversation. You come with a global perspective. Given what we've heard from Mike, coal is a critical resource in many nations and utilized in critical infrastructure. In fact, coal is needed to run many critical assets in country. So shouldn't it then be treated as a critical commodity?
I am advice several times. I tried to condense it to three questions from one. That was, is it critical now? And I think we've got fossil fuels generally are critical. And I tried to figure out why. And I realised that it's the abundance. It's the fact that it's so reliable, it's the fact that it's always there, and I think take it for granted. Critical mineral, from my definition, my perspective, is one that has supply constraints, bottlenecks. It's got real risk associated with it, maybe supply chain concentration. God doesn't have that. There's so much diversity, even within South Africa. Looking at the number of mining companies, we've got diversity. So, in the strictest sense of the word, it's not critical because it's there and it's so resilient and reliable, as well as the technology for the whole country. So, that was the first question. That isn't the firm answer, but it was just trying to ponder the thoughts. The second one, which is what my initial thought was, well, what happens when you strip coal out of the system, out of the global system? It doesn't become critical then. The answer is obvious. For an example, China brought 600 million people out of extreme poverty since the early 2000s, like 1996 to 1 years ago. 600 million from 100 people who don't have access to modern electricity in just Africa alone. Add on to that another 150 million worldwide. So then you've got these big numbers. So then I thought, well, okay, let's strip coal out of the system. Let's strip coal out of the South African system. You all know what happens when because you understand the significance. So I thought I'd look at it slightly differently. If you shut down and gave the power and past coal lines, do you want to follow that pathway? And because coal is so critical. So that's one of the ramifications, that's one of the things that people don't take for granted when they look at regions such as Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you've got Mike alluded to it, you've got 70% of global steel comes from coal-based steel. And where do most of the wind turbine components come from? The steel components are about 60% of the value of the wind turbine. Most of it's come from China. Guess how they produce their electricity? Same as cement, 80% of cement relies on coal. So you're going to have another 2 billion people coming in this continent. It's going to make up the all growth, the human population growth, and so how are you going to furnish them with infrastructure, schools, roads, and so forth, with a decarbonised, or rather, with a cement sector that doesn't use coal, as well as the fire coal sector. On top of that, I'll hand over because I know we've got panels to listen to. We've got the feedstocks for ammonia for fertiliser and food security. And guess who are the top fertiliser producers in the world? There are all the top coal producers in the world: Russia, USA, China, India, Indonesia. So you've got food security issues, and a lot of the hydrogen required for the ammonia production in China, a significant amount comes from gasified coal, and that's where India is moving as well as gasified coal. So strip all that out, then you haven't so much got lost critical fuel. You've suddenly created a new set of stranded assets elsewhere in the economy because you've undermined the security.
Now hand over to Siphelele. Changing tact a little bit. What do you consider as the role of science in the determination of criticality for coal in the energy transition discussion?
Good morning, Shamina, and good morning to the rest of the audience. We have a mantra at the Council for Geoscience, and it says that geoscience is the forefront of human development. And what that basically means is that science must lead in providing us with essential evidence for policy development, national decision making, and sustainable growth. So, as scientists, ours is perhaps an easier job because the science doesn't lie. Geopolitics is noisy, views change based on leadership, but the rocks never die. So, and as Mike said, that we've got decades and decades of coal still in South Africa, and all bodies are very patient, and they're not going anywhere. So we say instead of attempting to have evidence conversations based not on evidence and on leadership and prevailing circumstances at the time, should we not rather be looking at the facts? I think we've run through them in 82% of Eskom generation is coal-fired, the jobs that coal creates, the production that could reach close to 350 million tons per annum by 2050. Those are the statistics they are there. There's the flip side again of the carbon emissions of about 200 million tons expected annually. Should we not find an agreement for carbon? But then what's the balance? What's the research question? Surely it cannot be, should we continue mining coal? With that logic, we stop mining altogether because it's dangerous, there's fall of ground, there's human and machine interaction. But that's not what we did. We found scientific solutions to make mining safe. So ours then, as the CGS, and where our research plays a role, is finding solutions that could make mining coal safe or manage the carbon dioxide. So that's the premise for our CCUS, carbon capture utilization and storage pilot project. Countries like Norway, as an example, have successfully practiced CCUS for more than 3 decades. So that is already proof of concept for us. And of course, we can't plug and play their solutions into our unique environment. That is why we are busy with the pilot project at the end now. And we can inject and store an anticipated yearly 200 million tons that is expected from emissions from coal power stations. And on the flip side, there's the utilization of carbon, where you can capture it, you recycle it, and you create a carbon trading market. Studies are estimating that could be in the region of 220 billion USD just trading carbon. So there's two options where you can store the carbon or you can trade the carbon. So the research question for us is not necessarily whether coal is critical or not. It goes without saying the economic, employment and industrial information makes that question a bit null and void. But the scientifically grounded research question is, can emissions from coal utilization be materially reduced through technology while we preserve energy security and economic stability? And the science says yes.
Fantastic, Siphelele. I mean, there's so much of work ongoing about how you can recycle carbon, and it's not new for South Africa, right? We're doing it here. So there are options. I mean, if you look at Sasol's process and what they're doing, they could easily be also recycling that carbon, taking the CO2 and producing more products from it, right? The same could apply for an ArcelorMittal with their CO2 or cement. So these are different options. I really like how they're thinking around the space about bringing science to deal with the issues, but linking it with the industry and opportunities that are there. So, Abrengwe, let's bring you in. You're also in research. But I want us to take a developing country perspective. If you could shed some light, I mentioned that South Africa has a critical minerals and metal strategy. We have coal as a strategic resource. How should we be thinking about coal's role in a developing economy where we've got energy security needs and we have to think about how we expand our energy to others and for the country to benefit? So let me ask you, what's your views around this?
Great, thank you. And good morning to everyone. So I spent the holidays just going through critical mineral strategies for different jurisdictions, Zambia, Canada, the UK, China. And when you do that, it becomes immediately clear that the question of criticality is a geography-based question. So if you're in the UK and you don't have as many resources as we do, then you worry about supply chain issues. You also worry about more vulnerability type. Are we as South Africans thinking about undoing the 140 years of coal mining? We depend on it for 80% of our electricity. We know for the last 10 to 15 years we've had a difficult time with load shedding, so we clearly don't have any security. So if that is your starting position, the thinking then needs to be about energy addition as opposed to transitioning. Can we add as much energy as possible to what we have so that we can develop, and in developing we can then take along not only the 600 million people who don't have access to electricity, but we also keep intact the 98,000 jobs that directly depend on coal in our part of the world. That 98,000 number quickly goes to over a million when you talk about the livelihoods that are dependent on this resource. Mike mentioned that we'll still be mining coal for 3 to 4 decades. I'm a lot more optimistic than that. I think we'll be mining coal for quite some time. But even when you set aside the mining of coal and the combustion of coal, there's a whole new conversation now on using coal for advanced materials. And that's the conversation that we're really excited about. So there's combustion on one side, there's a conversation on advanced material, then added to that the whole conversation around the socio-economic implications of not being an energy secure jurisdiction. So the deeper I go into this, I wonder why we've been having the conversation in South Africa on whether coal is critical or not. It really goes without saying.
So I remember what you're saying, it's not a binary conversation. It's not this and that. Decarbonization, energy transition, or the use of coal. It can go together, and the technologies and research you're doing can help bridge that. Very interesting. Mike, bringing you back into the conversation. CEO of a significant coal player in South Africa. Let's be a bit provocative here and get into the details. Does coal still have a future in an evolving global energy landscape? I just want to link to what Havarin was talking about. Are we talking about stranded resources into the future, 2050 and beyond, or is there something we can do here? I mean, we've heard tidbits, but I want to ask your view on this.
Well, firstly, let me clarify an interesting point. You know, a lot of people, when we put a strong argument for coal, people will say, you are blackmailing us about jobs and socioeconomic. No, we're not. Let's leave that argument aside. The second point people come up with is an argument that coal is dangerous to mine. Let me tell you, 1993, there were more than 90 fatalities in the coal mining. 1993. Last year, our fatalities in South Africa were 41 as a country. The whole mining industry, coal had one. Actually, it was 0 until October. The point I'm making, our safety improvements have been amazing and phenomenal for this country and for the economy and globally. So to come to your point, coal is relevant. Go to China and see how many coal-fired power stations they are building, because they are unapologetic about their energy mix, that they will build coal-fired power stations, they will have nuclear power stations, they will do renewables. In fact, most of the renewables in wind and solar, you buy those components from China. But for you to industrialize and be able to produce things like wind turbines, solar panels, and the like, you need strong base load. And for us as South Africa, our base load for now, we've got the power stations, and I know that your argument will be they're aging. Well, we've got strong engineers who told us and showed us that these power stations can be run for more than 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Go to Sasol and check how many years have they run these plants they run for CTL and the like. It's more than 40, 50 years. So the debate about coal, that it's critical, it is critical and important. Two, let's invest in this resource for the coming 40, 50, 60 years. Three, it will help us as we transition to renewables. As we transition into renewables, we're not going to be stranded. I want us to do an exercise, and I know it's not doable, it's fantasy, that if you were to switch all these 50, 60 coal-fired power stations just for a night and see what happens. The reality of the matter, they still carry this economy. And we've got one nuclear power station, the whole of Africa is Quebec. If we added one and we added one coal-fired power station, so that would be me in the water bank, I would add one, maybe 2,000 megawatts. I will tell you that we got a strong base load. Then we can start transitioning into wind, into renewable, into solar and the like. It's not coal versus renewables. It's a wrong debate. It's coal and renewables. Coal will remain part of this transition for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I want us to just remember, as the audience here, it's net zero emissions by 2050. It is not zero emissions. In any of the science, right, we know this well. There are still these energy sources with fossil fuels still there. So we need to recognize how do we utilize what we have, but also grow the new sources so you have diversification. I really like what you're saying, Mike. Paul, can I come back to you? I want to take us back a little bit because I want us to dive a little bit into these definitions that nations use. Can I test with you? Labeling minerals as critical is defined by a nation's priorities. We've heard this repeatedly from the panelists. How do different countries and regions respond? What have you seen?
First of all, I want to applaud what Mike just said, actually.
Please.
There are fewer countries than you think that treats coal as a critical mineral. First of all, they narrow the definition, so they really like to just prefer to treat metallurgical coal, and particularly coking coal, not even thermal metallurgical coal, but coking coal is a critical mineral or critical raw material, as the EU actually listed. It's actually officially in the documents. India has just announced metallurgical coal is a critical mineral. They use the word mineral as in their definition. And the USA as well, metallurgical coal. But those are the only three key regions, other than the announcements we've recently had, of course, from Minister Natasha, where South Africa is pretty much sees all coal. Whether it's embedded in official documentation, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I'll defer to experts here. But generally, it's not seen as critical, perhaps for the reasons I outlined earlier. But what is clear is the US, on a slightly different note, it's completely somewhat the European rule, and now they've seen the value of thermal coal power generation. With the winters that they've recently experienced, I think it's the Midwest grid used coal power 40% of the power. That's some of the critical peak demand periods. Without getting too much down the electricity route, we see a lot of headlines saying solar and wind have completely outclassed nuclear, coal, and such in 2025 and 2025. That's all correct. Those facts are absolutely correct, and I can refute that. But when you listen to the grid experts, people are monitoring this on a minute by minute basis. They say that is not important. It's about timing. And if you don't time your solar and wind at the same time as you have your peak loading, I think you know it's better than any country on the planet. You know what happens. And this is what people don't realise. So in the rest of the world, they don't understand the timing. You've got 50, I don't know about here, but you've got 50 hertz brief block wide, maybe 60 hertz elsewhere. You only need a half a hertz deviation from that, and you've got quick hertz. It doesn't take a lot. So it's really important that coal stays online for those reasons of flexibility. And this is why the comments that we've had from Council Geoscience and Caltech are also part of the future. It's so important that we investigate everything. So coal online, you get rid of coal tomorrow and sterilise the industry and value chain. That's it. It may not come back. But let's also have a little bit of positive notes. Even in the UK, there are experts, not politicians, but there are experts who are talking about possibly bringing coal back to the United Kingdom. I never thought I'd ever heard that ever again, but I've had conversations recently in London amongst some experts in treasuries, and they're saying that it should be really bad.
Wow, that's very interesting because, you would think though that this is something that would come up given the price of energy in the UK. I was there recently. People are distraught about energy costs, so makes sense. Siphelele, over the years, how has the Council for Geosciences updated geological mapping, revised South Africa's total coal resource estimates, and how has this influenced energy planning here in South Africa? We just spoke about pricing. How has this helped in what we do?
So what geological mapping does is that it reduces uncertainty. Over the years, we've done and conducted high resolution mapping and research work in key coal bearing provinces. So obviously Mpumalanga, Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal, just to name a few. And what that has done is that we've been able to improve SIM correlations and thickness modeling. We are able to tighten up in terms of maybe refined CV and quality distribution data sets. And then obviously we update structural and geotechnical interpretations that would affect the minability and bankability of extracting the coal. And we even have research that has identified the occurrence of rare earth elements in coal, the iron and the chloride. And I think the cumulative effect is that it confirms the conversation as we are saying that we probably have in excess of 60 billion tons of coal remaining. The quality is still suitable for power generation and export grade blending. So what our work has done in influencing energy planning, perhaps I could group it into three, in that obviously we need to speak to security of supply, improve reserve classification, does the quality, where is it, what quality is it, and what is the long-term base load, as Mark keeps mentioning, to inform planning assumptions. Secondly, it speaks to spatial planning, because if you're looking at potential new coal areas like the Waterberg extension, you need to know as you're planning infrastructure that you do not sterilize what could be an investment decision. And then lastly, it's environmental integration, which is what we've been saying, that it's not the one or the other. So as we are looking at the IRP, we need to incorporate the meaning of this that we have and the possibility of improving it. So mapping does not advance whether coal is critical or it's not. It just defines the envelope within which energy policy can operate.
So you're working closely with government, and the council is really informing a lot of this policy. So you're informing the cadastre and this information inputs into it. Anyway, let me go back to research. We've heard about CCS, but I'd like to just ask you what other technology, low carbon technology options can be coupled with coal, and how we look at coal's use into the future. Please can you shed some light on that?
Happy to share. But first, I have Mike talking about it. Theoretical scenario will happen if we shut down the power stations. So, Mike, I had the same question on Saturday, so I ran that scenario through two different AI tools. And the answer was anywhere between 72 and 80 hours is the maximum you can get before your economy grinds to a halt. It's about Friday, best case, maybe Saturday morning. But we've tested that scenario. As it relates to, again, how we think about the future of coal and how we as coal tech and our partners are thinking about the future of coal and the application of low emissions technologies. We are currently working with a few partners on a few projects, but the one that we are spending quite a lot of effort on looks at a high efficiency, low emissions project, which will see us ultimately going beyond the pilot phase in a few years' time. And if we're able to do that, it then allows the utility to continue operating and meet the environmental regulations that have been set. So we're spending quite a bit on that. Obviously, keeping an eye on the work that the council is doing around CCUS. We felt that instead of duplicating that, let's take a national view. So we are running ahead with the project as an example. But the other investments that we're making this year, we have 6 projects that are looking at advanced materials. I spoke earlier about REEs. And one thing that is maybe not that are running this year will see us exploring different pathways to say, when you're looking at a waste valorization type project, can we get to a point where these coal fly ash dumps that we've been piling for many, many years, if we can reclaim those for REEs, now we are participating in a different economy. I spoke earlier about the value of coal from a combustion point of view, but through good application of R&D, we now know that we will actually be playing a much bigger role, even in the transition conversation, thanks to what we're finding in the coal fly ash, that's in addition to the brines, etc. That's some of the research that we are spending quite a lot of time on, again, with the support of our members.
It's very interesting, Marinwe. I mean, I just want to maybe probe a little bit. You mentioned environmental. We've been speaking a lot about climate. Can I maybe just ask? I mean, when we talk emissions, we're talking air quality as well. I mean, there's improvements across the board in terms of the research we're doing. We're looking at a sustainable utilization of coal. Do you want to maybe just add a little bit on that?
So just I want me to expand on the Gili as an example.
Yes, please.
I think it's well known that ESCOM has been under pressure from an environmental point of view. So in addition to the optics of what you see when you're looking at the old power stations. So in order for us as Coltech and our members with ESCOM to assist in that, we felt that a project directed at containing some of those emissions will benefit not only ESCOM, but it will benefit the whole coal value chain. So that's really where we
bring you. I'm obviously bring you bias to research. So my main consideration would be: are we investing enough in science and research to look at innovations? I mean, we just mentioned a couple. We spoke about CCUS. To make coal compatible with a lower carbon future. If we do not lead with science, we will blindly follow narratives that do not necessarily support our national policy.
Absolutely. Paul, same question.
Everything Siphelele said and anyway, in terms of research and development, absolutely critical for future coal's sustainable coal stewardship map, which is something I want to go into. Timothy's help, you can see it on our website. So, and also the work that Sarita doing, you can see it on our website. So, and also the work that Sarita doing in integrating renewables on mine sites. So all of this stuff is super exciting. So to add a slightly extra dimension, is future coal also a slightly extra dimension? Is future coal also absolutely endorses and respects the sovereignty of each country's priorities? So in 5 years' time, and I was asked a similar question the other day in a podcast, and I'll be honest with you, the pregnant pause probably was the worst that a podcaster would want, but it's genuinely what I felt, that in 5 years' time, 5 to 6 years' time, you will be on your light switch, your Wi-Fi, your appliances, plug in your electric car, and you won't have to think about whether those electrons are going to come out or not. It will be just second nature. It will be 24/7, 365 days a year. And this is what the region needs to fundamentally to develop and catch up in other areas. So really, your business as usual in 5 to 10 years' time would be and should be business as usual is elsewhere around the world. Whether it's affordable or not, that's another question, because you mentioned earlier about UK power prices.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Paul. Averengwe, can we bring you in? One consideration for the audience?
So I've been thinking a lot about the power of language, the things we say, what we call things. So when I think of, say, critical minerals, someone at some point defined the term critical minerals. We took that report and we ran with it without pausing to say, does this definition that I'm reading, say from Washington, or Quebec, does this apply to a South African context? So I do think it would be favorable or preferable for us to pause, think about the words that we use and the language we use when we communicate certain things, and say, for an African in South Africa, what is critical for us?
What makes sense?
Yeah.
Thank you, very much. Last but not least, one consideration.
We need to accept that our country, our region, our continent needs us to make decisions that are in the interests of this continent, these countries, and this region. We need to be careful of geopolitics misleading us in a way. I'll give you an example. When President Obama was president, he pushed the green energy. We went that route. Banks started going the other way. When President Trump came in, we did the same thing. We moved away. When President Biden came in, we started our green energy. Now, the net zero banking alliance has collapsed. You know why? Because there's a new order. In 2028, maybe Gavin Newsom becomes the president of the United States of America, a Democrat, brings in green energy. The net banking alliance will be reconsidered and may become the devil. We need to be careful what is in the interest of this continent. This continent first, and we do not disbelieve science. I believe scientists are right, and science is number one. But let's think of us as a population. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that draws us to a close. One thing is unmistakably clear. The global transition is a space where energy security, economic development, and climate ambition constantly intersect and often collide. Coal sits squarely in the middle of that tension. What we've heard today is that countries are considering coal and its role from very different starting points with different vulnerabilities. And ultimately, that brings
Yeah, stop. Amazing. Good job. Speaking of this,
Thank you so much to our panelists. Guys, can we give them another round of applause? I think that was a very
I need
real
to
and
try and
insightful
see how I
conversation.
can change it to that the source is coming from there. So I don't know how to do that.
All right, as you can please take your seats as we get ready for the next session. I think one of the big takeaways is not to every fantastic panel.
Here. Am I streaming? Right now, I'm still streaming.